The guard worked the graveyard shift at an industrial site that was highly isolated with very little activity during the night. He was often alone in his guard shack, which was situated next to an open, empty field. The appearance. It was around 2:30 or 3 a.m. The guard had stepped out of his shack for a smoke, casually looking at his phone. The site was so deserted that for the 5 years he had worked there, he had never once seen anyone walk out in the field at night. As he glanced up from his phone, he noticed movement in the distance across the field. He squinted and saw what looked like a small group of figures. The longer he looked, the stranger it became, floating and old. The figures seemed almost translucent or semi-transparent, and he could only clearly see them from the waist up, as if they were floating without legs. Their clothes appeared old, possibly from the late 19th or early 20th century. The figures suddenly stopped talking or moving and became quiet. They slowly turned their attention directly towards the guard, as if they had realized they were being watched. The eyes. As they looked at him, the horrifying detail became clear. They had no eyes. Where their eyes should have been, there were only dark, empty holes or sockets. The blackness was absolute, with no reflection or sign of life. The reaction. This entire sighting lasted no more than a minute, but felt like an eternity. A feeling of intense, sickening dread washed over the guard. He immediately threw his cigarette down, ran back inside the shack, and frantically locked the door. In a state of pure terror, he did what he had never done before in his 5 years on the job. He closed all the blinds, even the front ones that allowed him to look out. He turned on every single light inside the shack. He was shaking and tried desperately to call his wife, but she was asleep. The aftermath. Despite having hours left in his shift, the guard did not do another single patrol or round until the sun finally came up. He stayed huddled inside the brightly lit shack, trying to distract himself with podcasts or comedy shows, but the chilling dread remained. He later tried to research figures with black or empty eyes, but found the experience too disturbing. So he eventually just put it out of his mind. He never saw the figures again during the rest of his time working there. The story takes place late one night in a large, mostly abandoned building, sometimes described as an old theater, factory, or corporate complex, that was only partially occupied or undergoing renovations. The security guard was doing a routine patrol, shining his flashlight down long, dusty corridors. The encounter. He was walking along when he suddenly heard a distinct, loud creak behind him, like someone had shifted their weight on the old wooden floor or the metal structure. He immediately stopped and spun around. Standing just a few feet away was a man. What made the encounter truly terrifying was the man's posture and expression. Frozen mid-stride, the man was unnaturally frozen, as if he had been caught tiptoeing right up behind the guard. The smile. He had an unsettling, wide, mischievous smile plastered on his face. The kind of look someone has when they're caught with their hand in a cookie jar, but far more sinister. The weapon. Instead of a cookie, the man was holding a large steel pipe, an improvised but very deadly weapon. The escape. Instinctively, the guard pulled his sidearm. As soon as the intruder saw the weapon, the eerie smile vanished, and he took off running in the opposite direction, disappearing quickly into the confusing labyrinth of hallways and rooms. The aftermath. The guard called the police, who arrived and conducted a thorough sweep of the building with K-9 units. They found no trace of the man. What they did find, however, were signs that the man had been living in the building for quite some time, perhaps for days or weeks. In an old concession or storage area covered in thick dust, he had used his fingers to write bizarre, unsettling rhymes and had drawn numerous stick figures hanging from nooses. The chilling conclusion was that the man was a vagrant or someone severely disturbed who hadn't simply stumbled into the building, but had been secretly stalking the security guards, making a twisted, dangerous game out of creeping up on them and watching their movements before his final, terrifying confrontation. The security guard worked at a hospital which included several fully secured floors dedicated to mental health patients. Their job often involved controlling combative individuals, including many patients awaiting felony trials. This environment made for many difficult and shocking stories, but one stood out as the most gruesome: the welfare check. The guard and a colleague were alerted to a vehicle in the emergency room, ER, parking lot. The car had been sitting there, motionless, for about an hour, and the person inside was completely unresponsive to their attempts to get his attention. The discovery: when they cautiously opened the car door, they were confronted with a horrific sight. The man was in an almost feral-like state, clearly under the influence of powerful drugs, often speculated to be a large dose of methamphetamine. He was actively and deliberately trying to dig his own foot off using a flathead screwdriver. The extent of the injury: the guard recounted that the man had been successful to a terrifying degree, having mutilated the foot all the way down to the ankle bones on one whole side. The raw, exposed bone and the man's frenzied, focused state were like something out of a horror movie. The aftermath: the security team had to quickly and forcefully wrestle the man into the ER for treatment. Controlling a patient in that condition, highly aggressive, probably feeling no pain, and covered in his own blood, was an extreme challenge. The experience was cited as a prime example of the kind of visceral, terrifying reality that goes far beyond routine security and sticks with the guards long after the shift ends.